Well, welcome to episode 43 of the Hunt Backcountry podcast. I want to thank you guys so much for tuning in. This episode is part 2. So if you guys haven't caught episode number 42, it was the first of this 2-part recording with Barney. So the topic of these 2 episodes is on finding your next honey hole. So go check out part 1 if you haven't already, and then come back and listen to this part 2. The feedback from part 1 has been fantastic, guys. We've heard from so many of you that you really enjoyed this episode with Brian, so we want to get right to this, dive into part 2, picking up in the middle of our conversation about finding your next honey hole. Don't forget, check out the show notes at exomountaingear.com/43. Consider leaving us a review on iTunes or email us with your questions, comments, or feedback to podcast@exomountaingear. All right, here's part 2 with Barney. So you mentioned specifically in Google Earth how you change the timeline, and that's something that I've found incredibly helpful when looking at areas. Are there any other very specific tips or techniques that you use in Google Earth, kind of tricks that, guys might not be aware of, maybe they're newer to the program, and some of the specific ways that you use Google Earth?
Yeah, for sure. So, the timeline's a good one. And then, the Google Earth is just, it's only second to being there and seeing it in person. It's so nice to see a real image of what that country looks like and where you'll be headed. But there's so many tricks and secrets to Google Earth, like you say, like the timeline. And then, I like to, you can plot your hikes and plot your climbs. And so you can take notes of all the elevation of where you're at. If you switch that timeline, the feeding features are the big ones, is looking for the greenest country, the greenest bold basins. And a lot of times, if you can find lush country, you can start to find spots that you suspect there might be a spring in, or where you can fill up your water or something of that nature. Another one of my favorite tricks is I'm a spot and stock hunter. So if I can see it, I can kill it. If I don't do a lot of good walking around looking, I do better when I can get to a master vantage point and I can see country. And so that's what I'm looking for on Google Earth, is how am I going to see this country? And every little piece of country is different in how you're going to hunt it and how you're going to see it and how you're going to be effective in it. Sometimes, with a bunch of bold basins, you can get down in a lower elevation and glass up and see 6 different bold basins all at first light and see which deer is living in which, and then make your stalk on and around. Now, some country doesn't allow you to do that, and you can't see it from below, and so you're going to have to hunt it on the ridge, and you're going to have to take your morning, and you're going to have to hike along and glass in every single one of those bold basins that you come across. And so I try to make a plan through Google Earth. How am I going to see this country? And how I do that is, you can put yourself, or you can mark a point on Google Earth, and then what you do is you bring down the camera angle to right where you're at, right on that point, on that knob, on that ridge, wherever you're at, and then you kind of spin around Google Earth and you say, well, what can I see from here? What can I see this basin? Can I see this drainage? What's hidden from me? Is there a better spot to see it from? And sometimes I'm hiking away from bucks just to get a master vantage point to be able to see more country and see what's living in there. So for me, I am always looking for good vantage points on there, and vantage points, that aren't is easy to get to, or I don't want to have a place that you can see off the road. Like I said earlier, I want a place where you've got to hike and climb 2,000 feet of elevation, and all of a sudden you're on a knob in the middle of an amphitheater of basins where it's just like, now I can see the world. I will see what kind of buck lives in here in the next morning, evening, or next couple mornings, evenings. I'll know where those bucks are and what they're doing, and I can keep tabs on them, and I'd rather hunt them that way, where I can keep tabs and bet them, and then if I have to make a play, it's farther off, but at least I can see the whole thing, and I'm not just looking at a little piece of country. So I'd say that's where I get some of the most benefit out of Google Earth.
Yeah. I mean, for those of you guys who are newer to Google Earth, really the tools that Brian was just talking about to change your perspective, they're up in kind of that right-hand corner, those circular dials. And as Google Earth loads, it's obviously a bird's eye view and you're looking directly down from the sky. But using those tools that Brian mentioned, you can change your perspective, start to get lower, if you will, and then almost simulate, well, if I'm on this ridge at this vantage point, here's what I'm seeing, and you can kind of get a really good judge of the terrain by changing those perspectives. It's pretty awesome.
Yep, that's exactly right.
Yeah, very cool. Do you use Google Earth to plan ahead for your camping spots or potential camping spots? I know you mentioned marking those on the maps, and then along that same lines, what are you looking for specifically when you're camping for high country mule deer? Is it relation to those glassing vantage points, or what other factors go into you picking out a good camping spot?
Well, this changes a little bit as I get older. Safety is number one for me, which it wasn't when I was in my early 20s, but being through a few gnarly lightning storms, safety's number one for me. So what I'm looking for is I'm looking, I don't want to live right with the bucks in there. I want to live off the backside of a ridge from them, or I want to live maybe close to my vantage point, down lower off to where I can climb up to that vantage point every day. But like I say, nowadays, safety is number one. There is gnarly lightning storms in the high country that time of year. And those lightning storms, you ride out a couple of those in the high country or in the middle of the night. I mean, I've had so many flashes within a half mile of me and booming around. I've had to move my tent in the middle of the night, down a steep cliffs and just trying to get lower in elevation so I don't get barbecued by lightning. So my number one thing is safety in the high country. And so I'm looking for a spot that's a little bit lower. I don't camp on the tops of the peaks anymore. I don't camp on ridge lines up high. I want to find a nice saddle, and I don't want to be too low. I want to live up high where I'm effective, where I'm not climbing a bunch every day, but I want to be able to ride out a storm if it comes in, and I want to have a safe place to be, and I don't want to be living right in the bucks. And so when I'm looking for a camping spot, I'm looking for the highest flat spot with a little bit of trees around it, maybe a drainage that goes down. I mean, I'll get 1,000 feet off the ridgeline or 750 feet off the ridgeline, and I'll climb that every day to make sure that I've got a safe spot to camp. And then I just don't want to be camping in the bucks. If there's basins where I suspect there's bucks those will not be the basins I camp in. I'll go off the backside of the ridge, and I'll walk down there, and I'll find a little flat spot down there, down in the trees, or down in a spot down in there. So when I'm looking for spots to camp, like I say, I want to be safe, number one, and I don't want to camp in the deer, number two, and then I want to be close enough to where I can hunt effective.
Yeah, good stuff.
Do you pack up camp every day, or just kind of depend, or you always just more of a base camp and hunt from there, and then if you need to move, you'll go back to camp and pack up?
Yeah, that's exactly right, Steve. So I don't hunt much with my pack on my back unless I'm just roaming country looking for a good spot. But I would say usually what my game plan is to find where I'm going to be living and where I'm going to be camping and what I'm going to be hunting. I'll set up my little base camp, which just consists of a little bivvy camp, as minimalist as I can go. But I'll set up a base camp, and then I'll hunt out of that camp for, however long I can keep into bucks, however long it's good hunting in there. But I am not afraid to move my camp. If I'm not seeing what I want, or if it's not good hunting where I'm at, I'm right back to my camp that afternoon, and I'll pack it up and I'll start walking, over the next ridgeline or over the next drainage or wherever my next plan of attack is. I take my camp to there, and then same deal as I'll set up and I'll find a safe spot to camp and a good little place to set up my camp, and where I can get to everything I need, and then I'll hunt that location. If I don't see what I want, I'll move my camp again. If I do see what I want, then that's my base camp, and I'll live out of that little camp, and I'll go back and forth every day. And sometimes, gosh, I mean, you can get 5 miles, 7 miles away from that camp and still make it back at night. And so I'll travel good distances away from that camping spot to go look at different areas in that. But yeah, then I'm never afraid to pack it up and go again.
Okay, cool.
Good stuff. What do you think are the most common mistakes that guys hunt as they're learning to hunt mule deer specifically in the high country? And or another way to ask that would be, what do you think is like the most important lesson that guys should learn as soon as possible?
I think it goes right back to that spot and stalk mentality, that spotter's mentality, that I want to see that buck before that buck sees me. And so I don't want to go hunt through a basin in the middle of the day and spook everything out of it before I ever get a chance to make a stalk. And so I'm always trying to be low impact in the mountains. And what I mean by that is, as I'm traveling through country, I'm not going through the luscious green spots where they can see me. I'm not walking right on the ridgeline. I'm walking off the ridgeline, so I'm not skyline to everything. And I want to be really low impact, and I don't want to spook anything out or blow any bucks out. And so I've got this master plan in my head how I'm gonna hike to this spot, I'm gonna set my camp here, and I'm gonna grab this really good vantage point, and then I'm gonna see what lives in there. And so I would say the biggest thing with hunting high country mule deer is to not just bumble through country hoping you bump into a giant buck, or not going hunting through middle of the day. Is focus on those mornings and evenings, sit behind your glass, or like sometimes you've got to do a mobile vantage point where you can't see it all from one spot, and so you'll move, but don't just bum rush into a basin and spook them out. Use the backside of the ridge and then, sneak over the top instead of skyline and kind of crawl over the top and just pan everything with your binos you can see, and then crawl back over the ridge and then make your way to the next drainage and look in that. So I would say the biggest mistake guys make is not being low impact and kind of bumbling through country and spooking deer and alerting deer to their presence before they ever get a chance at making a play or making a stalk at them. So I would say that's the biggest mistake to new hunters, or the biggest thing they could gain from it is just to live and die behind their glass and really try to be low impact in the mountains, because if you can see those deer first, well, then you can watch and wait, and then you can get a high percentage play at that deer, to where if you're walking through and you're jumping deer here and there, it's very rare that I kill a deer that way or even get a chance at a deer that way. Most of the time I just see his hind end and a huge rack running away from me. I go, oh no, I messed it up,
Yeah.
Yep.
I think that's definitely something I can improve. I think at times, I know I'm guilty of just kind of maybe not dropping off the backside of that ridge or something, or if I got to get from A to B and I just cruise along the ridge line as fast as I can. But going that extra mile to, like you said, drop down 100 feet off the backside and get to your next destination.
Yeah. Actually, it was a great answer to transition to what I wanted to ask you about next, and that was kind of your optic setup and what you use for glassing, your preferences in terms of, when you run in spotter, when you run in binos, does that change? Is there one setup that you're always using? Kind of walk us through your setup for typical glassing for these high country muleys.
Yep. So for elk, a lot of times I get away with not bringing my scope because I can look at a frame and I can kind of tell what he is for binos. But for me, for mule deer, I just have not been able to get away without a scope. I just so I pack a scope with me. The one I use, I've actually got two models this year, but I've got a Swarovski and a Zeiss. Swarovski's a 20 by 60 eyepiece. The Zeiss is a 15 by 45, and I believe the Swarovski's a 65 mil objective lens. The other one's a 60. And those are all specifics that don't really matter. Basically, just a spotting scope, and I like to go the lighter spotting scope route more so than like a heavy 80 millimeter big objective lens on it, just because I try to keep my weight down. And so my typical setup is I run a pair of 10 by 42 binos, and I run a spotting scope, and most of the spotting scope is just with mule deer. It's so necessary just to see what those things are, even if you're not looking for a 180-inch deer or a 200-inch deer, just to tell, how many points it has and if it's mature enough, just to see what kind of buck it is, because their horns, it's really tough to see from long distances, and then even as you get close, it's tough to see exactly what they are. And so for me, when I'm looking for big bucks and I'm looking for the biggest buck in there, I always have my spotting scope, and I tend to just use my spotting scope for judging most of the time. So I'll use my 10 by 42 binos and I'll set up. I will look off a tripod. A lot of times I just use the knees to elbow technique, where you sit on your hind end, put your knees up, and you put your elbows on your knees, and you just start panning. And mule deer don't stick out once they get their gray coats. They can be really tough to see. So you've got to train your eyes and really pick that landscape apart. And so I focus on the feeding features first, and I'll go through all the feeding features, and then I'll start working the edges of the timber, and then I'll start taking more and more time and breaking down the country. The only time I'll pull out my spotting scope if I see a deer to identify it, or if I see something that I think is a deer and I need my spotting scope to see it. The only other time I'll use that is if I'm glassing extreme distances. If I'm glassing, say I'm sitting on a spot and I'm looking 3, 4, 5 miles away, and I'm not looking to see how big those deer are. I'm just looking to see if there are any deer there, because I'm sitting at a good spot first or last light, and now I can see even farther with my spotting scope. And so that's where I'll use my spotting scope to kind of dissect land that's farther off. I'll also use it, I guess, middle of the day if I'm trying to pick out a bedded buck in a piece of shade or a piece of timber. But for the most part, I pan everything with my binos, and then I just get out my spotting scope, to identify what it is.
Mm-hmm. Good stuff. So on the topic of gear, I'd love if you could talk a bit about your bow setup. I know that you take your archery gear quite seriously, and it's something that you've dove deep into. And Steve and I are actually in the middle of a podcast series talking a bit about kind of bow setup, some tuning topics, and we'll be diving into gear as well. So I would just kind of love to hear where your gear setup's at in terms of bow and arrows and broadheads, what you shoot, and then kind of maybe some of the reasoning or lessons learned over the years from things you have tried.
Yeah, absolutely. So I run, I love the compound bows. I do shoot a recurve, and I do want to harvest an animal with it. I haven't yet. And so I've practiced a bunch with that, but I love the precision of compounds, and I'm a tech guy. And so I love messing and tuning and tweaking, and I love getting that thing shooting perfect and putting in the practice and knowing when I'm walking in the woods that I can make that shot and kill that deer. And so, yeah, I take my bow setup super serious. I work with it all year round, and I'm always turning different stuff with my bows. So to start, I'm not a giant guy, but I stand 5'7", 150 pounds or so. I shoot a 70-pound bow. A 70-pound bow draws and holds really good for me, and it's just been the weight I've gone. And not that I would be against going with the 60-pound if I could shoot it better, but it just seems to be about the right fit for me for getting enough energy and then also being easy enough for me to hold my draw and draw back in different situations and make a good shot. And so I run a 70-pound bow, and I actually take a couple twists out of my cables, and I usually run that thing at about 68 pounds. And again, I just found, like the Hoyt bows, they show up and they're usually pulling 72, 73 pounds. And I just found that when my bows are set up at 68 pounds, I seem to shoot them a touch better. And so I've got mine turned down just a little bit. Like I say, around 68 pounds is what I shoot. I shoot a double stabilizer, which most guys don't. The sidebar thing is starting to catch on. I love it. So it just improves my accuracy. And so what I do is I shoot a 12-inch stabilizer out front, and then I shoot a 12-inch sidebar that comes back off the back of my bow. Now, with the ones I shoot Bee Stinger, which is a great company. They allow you to change your weights on both the front and the back of these stabilizers by 1 ounce apiece. And so what you can do is once you start changing these weights out, you can find how your bow holds the best, making sure that every time you draw back your bow, it draws back level and that feels level. That sidebar, it helps offset the weight of your sight and the weight of your quiver on that bow, and so it'll draw back more level. The other thing it does is, you get weight in two different places of that bow. It'll hold steadier. It's that's why those tournament guys are shooting stabilizers and sidebars and double V bars, is because it holds better on the target. And so once I started shooting this sidebar and this front bar, I could extend my effective range a little bit more, and I could shoot longer shots better, and I could also shoot closer shots better, and I could shoot better, with a heart rate. My pin isn't so jumpy on that animal. And so that's one thing that I do that's different than a lot of hunters out there, is that sidebar and that front stabilizer are both 12 inches, and I'm not afraid to add weight to my bow. I think right now I'm working with 2 different bows, and right now my setup is about 5 in the front, 5 in the back. So 5 ounces in the front, 5 ounces in the back, and that's pretty close to where I like it. And I'll jump around, and that also controls how your bow reacts as well. So this is the really cool thing that most guys don't realize, that not only does it make you hold better, but say you're shooting at a target and say you're having to pull really hard before your shot breaks and your shot goes high. And so you're getting these high shots when you're pulling really hard. Well, a lot of that is how your bow's reacting when you're pulling on that extra weight. How you can change that is you add an extra weight to the front, or you take away a weight from the back, and all of a sudden the bow wants to tip forward when you shoot, and all of a sudden you're starting to pull those high misses out of there. And same thing with like a low miss, as you're getting low misses, you take some weight off that back stabilizer, and all of a sudden that bow reacts a little bit different when it goes out. And so I will fine-tune my bow until my group sizes get super tight, and I'm not getting a lot of high misses or a lot of low misses, or left and rights. That can all be done by the way your sidebar, you give it more angle or less angle on your sidebar, and the bow will react different. And so it just gives you this other facet to your bow that you can think about and move weights around and just find the absolute best setup for you that'll hold the best. And so that's what I do a little bit different on the stabilizers. And then as I go to the rest, I love the fall away rests. The fall away rests are just so accurate. They fall away as your arrow is leaving the bow, and so your arrow stops making contact with the rest, and it stops making contact with the rest quicker than like a whisker biscuit and that's why I think they're better than like a stable rest. And everybody can shoot. This is just my own setup and my own beliefs, but I believe that fall away rest falls away from that arrow quicker, and so your arrow makes less contact with that rest going. So when you release your shot, your fletchings don't have to go through the rest. It's you release that shot, the rest falls away, and the arrow is now off on its way to the target. And so you gain these milliseconds on these other rests. And so I believe you pick up more accuracy that way with a fall away rest. And so I use a trophy taker, and then I've also got a rip cord, and they're all the rests are good nowadays. The only thing you want to make sure is just make sure that you're not getting any clearance issues where your fletchings are slapping your rest or your rest is bouncing back up into your arrows. You want an arrow that's just flying straight and true off the bow, and you get to that by paper tuning your arrows and making sure your arrows are coming off the bow right. And then so as we move from the rest to the sight, I shoot a slider sight, and a lot of guys are going to these nowadays, and I've been shooting a slider sight now for about 10 years now. I don't shoot a single pin. I shoot a 5-pin slider. And what a slider is you get a sight tape on the side of your bow, and you've got a pin that correlates to that. And then what you can do is you can dial. So if you've got a downhill shot and your rangefinder reads 44 yards, you dial to 44, and instead of holding your 40 pin high on them, you hold that 44 pin right on the middle of that deer and you execute your shot. It just makes you way more accurate because you're dialing to the exact yard of that deer. So I shoot a 5-pin slider, which is a little bit different. And why I shoot that is I've got 5 pins. So I've got my 20, 30, 40, 50, 60. And so when I'm setting my home position, which is 60, and my 60 pin is my mover, I've got 5 sights. Now it's just like having a normal 5-pin sight. Like I say, I've got my 20 through 60. So if I get a quick shot at a deer, or stuff happens quick, and I need to shoot 20 yards, I can shoot 20 yards quick. Or if I need to shoot 40 yards, I can shoot 40 yards quick. But if I can take my time and I get a good range and I dial in, which almost 90% of the time is me, or 95% of the time is me. I want to know the range. I want to dial for that animal. And so then I've got this mover sight and this 60-pin sight. Now I can roll that thing up to 37, or I can roll it down to 62. Or for long-range practice, and I'm not shooting any animals. I like to get inside 60 to kill them, and sometimes that range is even inside 50 and kill them. I don't want to mess around with sending long bombs and missing something or having the chance at wounding something. and you've kind of got to learn your own lessons with this. But I want to get close and kill that deer. So for me, I just want to get a little bit closer. I want to dial to the exact range, and I want to send a perfect arrow through them. But what this slider sight allows you to do is now you can slide down and you can practice it 85 yards or 86 yards, and you dial right to that yardage, all the way out to 110 or 115 yards. Now all of a sudden shooting these long shots, you get into 60, and 60 feels like 20 because you've been trying to aim at 100 yards. And so I use that technique for my training, but I love the slider sight. And so I use a black gold slider sight, and in mule deer country, you got to get one with a third axis adjustment. The third axis, and it's kind of a hard theory to grasp and understand, but it's
especially tough to describe without visuals, just on the
audio
here.
Gosh, isn't that the truth? Yep, I'm with you. With a visual, I can almost explain it, but over a podcast, it's a little tough.
I think the most helpful analogy is kind of like a door and a hinge,
Yep. Exactly, a door and a hinge. I mean, basically what it is when your bow's shooting all level and true, you're good. But as you start aiming downhill, all of a sudden that level and true isn't level and true anymore. And for a right-handed archer, all of a sudden, you'll start to miss these animals right on a downhill shot. Even if your bow's level, your level's level, everything's level, but you don't have your third axis set. And so your third axis is a downhill and uphill tool for making sure that these 40 and 50 yard shots downhill, that you're not missing left and right. And so there's tons of literature over the internet about it, and you can watch YouTubes on it and grasp the theory of third axis. But I think it's just important to know that all you archers that want to hunt high country mule deer, you're going to have downhill shots, and you really need to have a third axis adjustment on your sight if you want to make those shots. I've had buddies that haven't paid attention to it, and they've paid for it, where they've missed really good deer that they should have made that shot, but they just didn't have a third axis or didn't know about third axis until I explained it to them and explained why they need it. But it's super important on high country sites for a third axis adjustment.
So Brian, go ahead, Steve.
I couldn't agree more.
Yeah. So you mentioned if you have the time and you have a bucket 47 yards, instead of gapping him between your 40 and 50, you'll actually dial up where your 60 pins right on that 47 number.
That's absolutely right. Yep. I've got much.
So many guys who are, as you mentioned, the sliders are becoming more popular, but the guys with the multi-pin sliders, I think most of them overlook that fact that they can't actually dial up because it's so focused on dial down, dial down. My 60-yard pin can go out to 100, but they don't actually think you can dial the other way. So I just wanted to make sure that was a clear point.
Oh, that's a great point, Mark. Yes. So I've got so much confidence in that slider, and I shoot it so much, and whether you like a 3-pin slider, a single pin slider, or a 5-pin slider like what I shoot, all I really need is that 5th pin slider. I'm just really used to it because I've been using it for 10 years. And I'm also, I'm not just hunting mule deer. I'm hunting antelope and I'm hunting elk where things happen quick. So I want to be able to have that multi-pin just in case a scenario like that presents itself. But no, any chance I get, I am using that slider because those downhill shots, a lot of times, your rangefinder might read 38 or 42, but that may be a 55-yard shot. And if you're trying to gap shoot that shot at 55 yards, most likely you're going to send it over his back or under his belly because it has to be a precise, precision-made shot. And that's what those sliders are made for, is to dial to that 38 and 42. I love how Steve agrees with me because you're a mule deer hunter too, because you've seen it in those slider shots. They're just so effective to be able to slide to that exact yardage and execute your shot and know your arrow's going in the middle.
Yeah. And just to make one more clarification, trying to think of the guys who might be newer to that concept, keep in mind that when you're moving a slider sight from its home position, there's only one sight pin that's relevant. So what I'm getting at is I don't want guys to think, I need to shoot 37, let me dial my 30-yard pin down a little bit. That's not at all the way it works. It's only that one pin that you sight in with your sight tape, your bottom pin essentially. Whether that's 60 for Brian on his 5-pin, I actually run a 3-pin, so for me that's my 40. Only that 40-yard pin that I set my sight tape to is irrelevant as soon as the light or as soon as the sight leaves that home position. All the other pins at that point don't matter. The yardages are not going to be accurate at that point. So
that's exactly right.
That might cause some guys some headaches if they go trying to do anything else.
And one guarantee with a slider sight is there will be a time where you're set for 80 and you send an arrow flying through the air over your target because it wasn't set right. It just happens to all of us, but it's a good lesson to learn, and you just say, oh boy, I sure don't want to do that on a buck. I'm always going to make sure like I've got a highlighter mark by my home position. And, throughout the day, I'm always looking at my slider to make sure I'm in my home position. So it's just so I will not make that mistake on a buck or whatever. But that's one mistake that I guarantee once you go to a slider, you will send an arrow over a target, but just learn from it.
My first 2 or 3 years when I switched to a slider, probably back in 2008, 2009, I freaking lost a dozen arrows a year to that. It would piss me off so much. We had a 3D tournament, just oh crap, I forgot to adjust. Arrow goes over, sailing over the back.
I almost did that just recently at the Northwest Mountain Challenge because we were shooting that pure elevation course, and on every single shot you're dialing because it's 84 and then it's 62 and you're dialing every time. And then I, shot the pure elevation course, transferred to another course, and the first shot was 40, it was right at 40 yards actually. So I'm like, oh, perfect, I have a 40-yard pin. Just threw it up there and hit high, and I'm like, what the heck? That was weird. It felt like I executed great. It wasn't until the second target I would hit high again, I was like, my slider from the pure elevation is not at the home position.
Yeah, that'll happen.
Okay, well, to wrap up on that, Brian, I'd love to hear kind of about your philosophy on arrows and broadheads that you use.
Oh, yeah, for sure. So I've gone to the smaller diameter arrows, and so this year I'm using the gold tip Kinetics, which are just awesome arrows. The gold tip Kinetic Pierce arrows. So they're the super small diameter ones. Gold Tip just came out with them this year. The year before I used the Kinetics, but both of those arrows are such great arrows. I couldn't say enough good things about them. Just their components on the back. So you've got a bushing and then you've got a knock on the back of the arrow. It's just a super accurate way to get a true consistent knock on your arrow every time. And they're really tough. That bushing helps protect the end of your arrow. So if you hit it or ding off it, you don't ruin the back of your arrow. You just replace the bushing, replace the knock, and you're good to go. Also, on the front end of the arrow, they've done a lot of design work on the front end of their arrows, and they've got an outsert, which basically is an insert, but it's got a small 3/8 of an inch that sticks out, and then they've got this brass sleeve I don't know if it's brass colored, but a metal sleeve that then sits over the end of the arrow and protects it protects the outsert and it protects the end of the arrow. So all of a sudden, when you hit something hard like a rock or you're not blowing up the end of your arrow. This thing protects it to where it's bomb proof for shooting through bone, through shooting through anything. And so I couldn't say enough good things about these arrows. I'm really happy with them, and there's a ton of great arrows on the market. But you want to get the right spine for your bow, and so. Me, I'm a shorter archer. I'm able to get away with a 400 spine, and I shoot a fairly short arrow. I mean, my arrow is only 25 inches. It's only an inch past my rest, but it's perfect. The shorter your arrow, the less wind drift it can catch. It's the less arrow out there for the wind to grab and move from side to side. So I shoot a smaller arrow with a 400 spine, which a 400 spine, you have to get the spine that matches your bow and your poundage, and they have charts out there where you can look at Easton and Gold Tip and these different companies. And then also there's a great program called Archer's Advantage, which is an internet program that I use where you can really fine-tune and put in all the numbers of your bow and find the perfect reacting spine to your bow. But for me, it's a 400 spine, and I've got my cut down to where my spine reacts perfectly to my bow. I shoot a lot of weight out front, like a lot of weight forward. I feel like the weight forward pulls my arrows to the target better, and I get better grouping, better consistency, and I like a heavier arrow. I get me being a 27-inch draw length, I don't have a 30-inch draw length, and so I lose a lot of energy that a lot of other guys gain. And so I've got to kind of go with a heavier arrow. And so my finish weight on my arrows right now, I have two different bow setups with two different arrow setups. But the one bow, I'm shooting a 435 grain arrow. The other bow, I'm shooting a 450 grain arrow, which is not super heavy, but it's heavy for compound standards. A lot of guys are getting down to that 400 mark, which works fine if you've got a longer draw length, or even for me, I'm sure it would pass through an animal, but I just want as much chance as I can to get as much penetration and get an exit hole and get a good blood trail. And so I tend to stick around that 430 to 450. I've even been upwards of 475, and I just tend to get too much drop and not much more gain out of my arrow. So that's kind of the sweet spot for me is the 435 to 450 range. And then the other cool thing about these gold tip arrows is you can add grain weight to the front of that insert. So you use this big long wrench and you can put it down your arrow, and you can add 20 grains at a time or 10 grains to a time to the front of your arrow, and that makes your arrow weight heavier, and it also makes your front of center more. And so my front of center on my arrows, I'm running about 15% front of center on my arrows, and I just feel like on those longer shots or any shot for that matter, those arrows just pull and track better to the target, and I get better grouping out of them. And so I really like the heavier front of center. 15% front of center is a little much, but somewhere in that 13 to 16%, somewhere in there is my really good arrow that flies really good for me. And then I'm sticking those 20 grain weights in the front. Those Pierce arrows came out a little bit lighter than I like, and so I've got two of those 20 grain weights in the front, and then along with that, I shoot a 125 tip, and so I've got a ton of front of center on my arrows. I really like the way they shoot that way. And then so I'm using 125s on mine. I like an expandable broadhead. I've shot all different kinds over the years, and for me, it's all about where you hit that animal. I'm not worried about a bad hit having a bigger cut, or and for me, a bigger cut isn't always a good thing because I want penetration. I want that thing to get through that shoulder bone. I want that thing to get me an exit hole so that thing bleeds out. And so I'm not looking for this huge cutting diameter that cuts this mammoth hole because you won't get the penetration. And so I'm looking for a broadhead that does damage, but my main characteristic of a broadhead I want is something that flies good. I want it to be aerodynamic. The bigger your blades are on the front of your arrow, the more it's like shooting fletchings on the front of your arrow, and the more it affects that arrow flight. And you'll notice if you shoot broadheads a bunch, it's tough to make your broadheads shoot as good as your field points because they just catch more wind and more wind drag. And that's the other thing is as you're shooting, I live in Ennis, Montana. The wind blows every single day here, so I'm always shooting in the wind, and so I know a lot about wind drag, or not wind drag, wind drift, excuse me, but that the wind affects wind drift drastically, and it'll blow an arrow a foot to the side at 50 yards at even just like a 6 or an 8 mile an hour wind. It blows arrows drastically off target. And so the more aerodynamic I can make my broadhead, the more confidence I have in it, the more I know I can hit in the middle. And so that's my main thing is I want to get away from the wind drift. I want the most aerodynamic broadhead that's going to be the most forgiving setup, and I want to know where that thing hits. And so I'm looking for accuracy above all else. I want that broadhead to hit accurately. I haven't, if I hit them in the middle, they die. That's just the way it is. Now, me with my shorter draws, the only place I get into trouble is with the shoulder bone. In the shoulder bone, I hear guys that, I've got a buddy at Eastman's that shoots for the shoulder on antelope and on whitetails. I cannot. If I hit that shoulder bone, my broadhead doesn't penetrate through, it sticks in, and I don't get the animal, and so that's my bad shot. And so I tend to practice and aim off that shoulder blade about 4 or 5 inches, and especially true on elk, no matter how much kinetic energy you have, it is tough to go through a shoulder of an elk. And so I tend to stay away from that shoulder, and so I aim for more of the middle of the lungs instead of that tight rocket shot right behind the front shoulder, and aiming with the middle of the lungs. Then if I hit back, I'm still getting liver. That deer's going to die, and he's going to die quick. If I hit, towards the shoulder side, well, then I get heart and I get lungs, and that thing dies. And so, I like shooting, I'm kind of getting off topic, but I love to shoot an aerodynamic broadhead. And so there's a lot of great ones on the market nowadays, and I think, you can trust the majority of them out there. But, I'm shooting the Grim Reapers, and I've been shooting them for years. I shoot the Grim Reaper 3-blade. It's an old style front activated broadhead, but it doesn't have any rubber bands, it doesn't have any O-rings, it doesn't have anything that wears out on it, and it always opens. I can just trust it. I know when I hit that animal in the middle, he's going to die, and it's a super aerodynamic broadhead. Now, and there's a lot of great ones on the market too. All the broadheads out there. I've got buddies that use all different types. I've experimented with all different types, and they all do pretty good. And I would just say that you want it to be consistent. You want to know that it's going to open when you hit in the middle, and then super aerodynamic.
Yeah.
So sorry about that. I get a little long-winded when I start talking about aero and a little off topic, but there's just so much information there.
Yeah.
It is. Yeah, there's so many variables.
I was gonna say one thing that's very apparent is just your attention to detail, and I think that's a lot of part of probably why you're so successful. It's just paying attention to all those little things, because at the end of the day, they add up to trophies on the wall and meat in the freezer.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's exactly right, Steve.
Yeah. Well, let's pull a flip on that, and this is a question that we enjoy asking Brian. I mean, obviously an incredibly successful hunter. Very experienced, but what's one thing that you're still learning, or that you would consider something that you're trying to improve upon still?
Gosh, that's a great question. So something I'm just always trying to improve every facet of my game. Everything we talked about today, I'm trying to improve. Like this year, I've got these great opportunities in front of me. I'm actually embarking on filming this year, which Eastman's is going to try to capture a couple of my hunts on film, which I think is really cool and I'm really excited for. But so I'm coming into every season, and I train. It's an extreme sport to me, and it's a lifestyle. Every day I'm trying to get better, and that's part of the thing that I enjoy about bow hunting. It's this ever evolving, ever learning circle to where I don't think you ever reach I don't think you ever get to a point where it's like, I can't learn anymore, I can't get any better. I think the smart hunters out there are always learning and always getting better. And I share everything, that all my knowledge and everything I've learned, I write down and I share with Eastman's. I don't keep any secrets, and so all my information is out there. And so in my mind, I've got to continually be improving, because I'm giving away all my information all the time, making everybody better. And I want to stay in front of the curve. I want to be the guy that's finding the next spots. And I want to be the guy that doesn't miss a shot. I missed that shot in Nevada last year, and so, I think about that and I work hard. And so, like my practice, I don't just shoot every day. I'm shooting twice a day. I'm waking up early in the morning and I'm shooting arrows. I'm shooting in the afternoon. I'm going to a 3D course with a buddy tonight up in Jack Creek, a place by my house here. But so I'm trying to take my shooting to the next level, and I want to have shoot tighter groups and shoot better under high pressure. And I don't want to miss that shot this year. I don't want to have a chance at a giant buck and miss it. And so I'm trying to improve every facet of my game. And along with that, my fitness, and I love trail running. It's one of the ways I prepare for these hunts, and it's just something I can do every day. And it feels like I'm working hard towards my goal of killing a giant buck or a giant bull. Every day I'm paying my tax and I'm working towards that, and I'm putting my effort in. And there needs to be other work, like backpacking and other, weight work in the wintertime. But trail running for me, I love running mountain trails, and I'm constantly, every day I'm running mountain trails, and it's a fine line for me where I don't want to get an injury and I don't want to overtrain. But I've heard Cameron Haynes say I'd rather be overtrained than undertrained, and that's me. I average 8 to 10 miles a day, and I'm getting in 50 to 60 miles a week, and so I'm taking everything to the next level all the time throughout my hunting. I just always want to be better.
Yeah. Awesome.
Great response.
Yeah. Well, as you said, and I appreciate you said it, that you always want to share everything that you have and what you're learning, and you don't have any secrets. And that's obvious. And what's obvious in what you do with your writing, and it's obvious in all the information that you've shared with us today. We really appreciate it, Brian. Before we let you go, is there any place that you would point our listeners to in terms of being able to follow your work or get in touch with you?
Yeah, so the Eastman's Bow Hunting Journal is where I write in most, and I'm in about every one. Every once in a while I'll miss one or I won't have a project in, but they keep me pretty busy, and like I say, they're bringing me more in the company. But yeah, the Eastman's Bow Hunting Journal is such a great avenue for learning, and it's a great way to pick up my articles. They also put a lot of my articles, you can find it on their website, just at eastmans.com, and then go to their blog or their e-newsletter. I always have articles in there that I'm always writing about. I would say, that this year, as long as I can pull it out, hopefully we'll have a show, on Eastman's Hunting TV. So I've just got to get one on film, and then I'm new to social media. I've always saved my content for the magazine, and I've always wanted this original content, original pictures for the magazine, and so I've kind of steered away from social media. I haven't really put myself out there too much, because I'm trying to save this content, and I'm always focused on running and shooting and hunting, and so I'm brand new to social media. I've been on Instagram is the only platform I'm on now, but I've been on Instagram now for about 3 or 4 months, and it's such a great outlet, and I'm glad I've joined. You can reach more people this way, bring more people to the magazine, show more people what you're doing, and share more things out there. And there's a lot of great follows out there too. Like I love following Steve on his Instagram and seeing what he's up to. And so, yeah, I've started on the social media. So I'm on Instagram. It's Brian_Barney. Like I say, I'm 3-4 months into it. I'm still learning, but it's so great to be able to share this catalog of thousands and thousands and thousands of pictures that I have on file already, and then the thousands of pictures that I'm taking every day when I'm always grabbing content for the magazine. So, tonight when I'm up shooting this 3D course up Drac Creek, I'll have pictures of my buddies and pictures of arrows and anything I could dream of up there. And so I'm constantly trying to capture things and make the right mix of real-time things with past things as well. So you can follow me on Instagram there.
Yeah, awesome. Well, Brian, once again, thank you so much.
Yep, for sure. Yeah, thanks you guys. I hope I didn't get too long-winded in a couple of those subjects. You get me going and talking about hunting or my bow setup, you can't shut me up.
Hey, we know how that
thanks
goes.
a bunch, you guys, for having me on. I sure appreciate it.
Yeah, being excited about it is never a bad thing, that's for sure.
Absolutely.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, that is a wrap, guys. Really hope you enjoyed that one. Thank you so much to Brian for joining us. Once again, the show notes are at exomountaingear.com/43, and you can send your questions, comments, or feedback to podcast@exomountaingear.com. Until next time, hope scouting's going well, hope the training's going well, hunting season's coming soon. I hope you're stoked for it.